found her inside this forest. Please take care of her. I know I can trust you.
Welcome to Heritage Story, your #1 folktales channel for amazing stories.
The convoy of black SUVs tore through the narrow village path, kicking up red dust that choked the air. Inside the lead vehicle, Chief Adikun the Lade sat rigid, his expensive Agba soaked with sweat that had nothing to do with Lagos heat. His hands trembled against his walking stick as fever ravaged his body, the same mysterious illness that had killed 12 people in the city within 3 weeks. No doctor could name it. No hospital could stop it. His driver, Bayo, glanced nervously at the rearview mirror where the billionaire's face had turned gray, his breathing shallow and desperate. They were racing toward a place Chief Adikun had sworn never to acknowledge, toward a healer the entire city whispered about, a young woman they called a forest healer who lived in a shrine deep in Ocean Forest. The same forest where, 23 years ago, he had ordered this very driver to abandon his newborn daughter because a skin condition had shamed him. Now that shame was about to collide with survival, and Chief Adikun didn't know it yet. But the daughter he left to die was about to become his only chance at life. If you want to know how a billionaire's cruelty came back to destroy him, make sure you watch until the end. And don't forget to subscribe because this story will break your heart and put it back together in ways you never expected. The vehicle stopped abruptly before a modest shrine built from clay and surrounded by medicinal plants that seemed to glow in the late afternoon sun. Chief Adikun could barely walk as Bayo and 2 bodyguards helped him out, his designer shoes sinking into the soft earth. Village children scattered as they approached, whispering about the rich man who had come begging for help. An elderly woman emerged from the shrine, her gray hair wrapped in white cloth, her eyes sharp and knowing. She was Mama Aduke, and everyone knew she had raised a forest healer from infancy. She looked at Chief Adikun with an expression that made his fever-soaked mind uncomfortable, as if she could see through his expensive clothes into the rot of his soul. Without a word, she turned and gestured for them to follow her inside. The shrine was cool and dim, lit by clay oil lamps, and filled with a scent of herbs that Chief Adikun couldn't name. His bodyguards tried to follow, but Mama Duke raised one hand firmly. Only the sick man would enter the healing room. Chief Adikun felt a spike of fear that had nothing to do with his illness. Mama Duke led him through a beaded curtain into an inner chamber where a young woman sat grinding herbs in a wooden mortar. She didn't look up immediately, her focus complete, her movements graceful and deliberate. She wore a simple white wrapper, and her hair was braided in traditional styles, with cowrie shells woven into the patterns. When she finally raised her head, Chief Adikun's world tilted on its axis. Her face was beautiful, her skin rich and dark, her eyes intelligent and piercing. But it was a birthmark on her left shoulder, visible where her wrapper had slipped slightly, that made his heart stop. A star-shaped mark, dark against darker skin, identical to the one he had seen on his newborn daughter 23 years ago before he ordered Bayo to take her away. The mortar fell from her hands, herbs scattering across the floor as she stood abruptly, her eyes widening as she stared at the man who was suddenly no longer just another patient. Mama Duke had told her stories, shown her the few things that had been wrapped with her as a baby, including a hospital band with the name of Lade embroidered on it. Recognition crashed through both of them simultaneously. The billionaire who had abandoned his sick daughter was staring at the daughter who had survived to become his only hope. Chief Adikun opened his mouth to speak, but Temi raised one hand sharply, silencing him the way her adoptive mother had silenced his bodyguards. Her voice, when it came, was soft but carried the weight of 23 years of abandonment. "I know who you are," she said simply, and those 5 words contained more pain than any scream could have held. Chief Adikun felt his knees weaken, and it wasn't just the illness anymore. It was a crushing reality that the daughter he had thrown away like garbage had become a woman of dignity, power, and skill. That while he had been building his empire and attending society parties, she had been learning to heal, to help, to save lives. The same life he had tried to end before it truly began. Mama Duke moved to stand beside Temi, her hand protective on the young woman's shoulder, and Chief Adikun understood in that moment that he was not standing before a helpless child. He was standing before 2 women who knew exactly what he had done, who had every right to let him die the way he had tried to let his daughter die. His pride, his money, his power meant nothing in this room. He was just a man facing the consequences of his cruelty. Temmie's hands were steady as she picked up the scattered herbs, her movements controlled despite the storm that must have been raging inside her. She didn't look at Chief Adikun again as she spoke, her voice carefully neutral. "Mama Duke, please prepare the guest chamber. This man is very sick, and it will take 7 days of treatment to cure him." The words were professional, clinical, but they landed like stones in Chief Adikun's chest. 7 days. 7 days trapped in this place, forced to face the daughter he had abandoned, dependent on her mercy for his very survival. He wanted to speak, to explain, to apologize, but his throat closed around the words. What could he possibly say? That he had been ashamed? That his reputation had mattered more than her life? That he had convinced himself she would die anyway, so abandoning her wasn't really murder? Temmie finally met his eyes again, and what he saw there wasn't hatred. It was something worse. It was a complete absence of anything. She looked at him the way one might look at a stranger, and Chief Adikun realized that to her, he was less than a stranger. He was a man who had proven that even a father's love had conditions, and she had failed to meet them before she could even speak. As Mama Duke guided him toward the guest chamber, Chief Adikun heard Temmie's voice one more time, soft and devastating. 7 days, and then you leave. Whether you're healed or not depends on whether you can finally face the truth of what you did. The door closed behind him, and the billionaire who controlled empires found himself imprisoned by the consequences of his own cruelty, with no money or power able to buy his way out. What will Chief Adikun discover about himself in these 7 days? Will Temmie choose revenge or mercy? Hit the like button if you're already feeling this story, and let's continue this emotional journey together. 23 years earlier, the private hospital room had been filled with tension so thick it seemed to choke the air. Chief Adikun Lalaid had stood by the window overlooking Victoria Island, his back rigid, refusing to look at the bundle the nurse tried to show him. His wife, Folktales, lay exhausted in the hospital bed, her face wet with tears that wouldn't stop flowing. Their newborn daughter had been born just 3 hours ago, and already their marriage was cracking under the weight of disappointment and shame. The baby had a rare condition that made her skin appear unusually dark and mottled, with patches that doctors couldn't fully explain. More concerning were the respiratory issues and the weakness that made her cries sound more like a kitten's mew than a healthy infant's wail. Chief Adikun had taken one look at his daughter and felt his ambitions crumble. He was on the verge of being elected chairman of the Nigerian Business Council, a position that required perfect image, perfect family, perfect everything. How could he present this child to society? What would people say about the great Chief Lalaid having a daughter who looked sick and different? His pride wouldn't allow it, and his heart, already hardened by years of putting business before people, found it easy to make a terrible decision. Folktales had begged him with words that still echoed in Chief Adikun's memory as he lay in the guest chamber of Temmie's shrine. "She's our daughter, Colonel. She's ours. We can get her treatment. We can help her. Please don't do this." But he had been unmoved, his mind already calculating the social costs, the whispers at the country club, the pitying looks from business associates. He had told Folktales the baby wouldn't survive anyway, that it was better to let nature take its course quietly than to subject them all to public scrutiny and pain. What he meant was that it was better to hide his shame than to love his child. Folktales had deteriorated after that, sliding into a depression so severe that she barely spoke for months. Their marriage became a hollow shell, maintained for appearances while rotting from the inside. Chief Adikun had called Bayo, his most trusted driver, a man who had been with him for 15 years and knew all his secrets. He had given him instructions in the cold voice of a businessman eliminating a problem. Take the baby to Ocean Forest, deep where no one goes, leave her there with some cloth to wrap her, and return. Don't tell anyone. Bayo had looked at him with horror, but loyalty and fear had won. The next morning, before dawn, Bayo had driven into the forest with a bundle that made soft mewing sounds, and Chief Adikun had told the hospital his daughter had died in the night. He had paid for silence, held a quick private burial with an empty coffin, and moved on with his life. Or so he had thought. Now, lying on a simple mat in a room lit by a single oil lamp, Chief Adikun's body burned with fever while his mind burned with memories he had buried for over 2 decades. The mysterious illness that had hit Lagos was unlike anything doctors had seen, causing fever, delirium, and eventual organ failure. It had started in the slums but quickly spread to the wealthy neighborhoods, proving that money couldn't buy immunity from everything. Chief Adekun had been the 13th person to fall sick, and he had watched the others die one by one, their expensive hospitals useless against whatever this was. Desperation had driven him to listen when his cook mentioned the forest healer, a young woman who had cured 3 people from their neighborhood using ancient methods. Chief Adekun had dismissed it initially, his faith in modern medicine and his pride preventing him from seeking help from a village healer. But as the fever worsened and the doctors began preparing his family for the worst, Bayo had intervened. The driver had gotten on his knees, tears streaming down his face, and confessed everything. He told Chief Adekun's second wife, Amora, about the baby abandoned in the forest 23 years ago. He told her about the forest healer's age, her birthmark, the stories that she had been found as an infant wrapped in expensive hospital cloth. Amora had been horrified but practical. If there was a chance this healer could save her husband, they had to try, regardless of the past. She had convinced Chief Adekun, barely conscious with fever, to make the journey. He had agreed, not knowing he was about to face his greatest sin in human form. Temi entered the room carrying a clay bowl filled with steaming liquid that smelled of roots and earth. She didn't speak as she set it down beside him, her movements efficient and emotionless. Chief Adekun tried to sit up, his voice hoarse. "Temi, that's your name, isn't it? Your real name. The one I gave you before." He couldn't finish the sentence. "Before I threw you away like trash." Temi's eyes met his, and for the first time he saw a flicker of emotion. Anger, yes, but also pain so deep it made his chest ache. "Mama Duke gave me that name," she said quietly. "She found it written on the hospital band that was wrapped around me. She kept it because she said every child deserves to keep the one good thing their parents gave them, even if they gave nothing else." The words were arrows, each one finding its mark. Chief Adekun felt tears sting his eyes, something that hadn't happened in years. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I was so wrong. I was afraid of what people would think, afraid of how you would affect my image, my business. I chose my pride over your life, and I have no excuse. None." Temi's hand trembled slightly as she lifted the bowl, the first sign that his words had affected her at all. "Drink this," she said, not acknowledging his confession. "It will make you sleep, and the fever will break by morning. You'll still be weak, but the worst will pass." Chief Adekun drank the bitter liquid, his hand shaking so badly that Temi had to steady the bowl. As the medicine began to work, making his limbs heavy and his mind foggy, he heard her voice one more time, soft and broken. "You didn't even ask if I was a boy or a girl before you decided I wasn't worth keeping. The nurse told Mama Duke that. You never held me, never looked at me properly. I was just a problem to eliminate." The words followed Chief Adekun into fevered sleep, where he dreamed of a crying baby in the forest, of Folake's face wet with tears, of all the years he had built his empire while his daughter learned to survive without him. He dreamed of board meetings and society parties while in the forest a little girl learned to identify herbs from an elderly couple who had found her and chosen to love what he had chosen to abandon. When he woke the next morning, the fever had indeed broken, but he felt more broken than the illness had ever made him. Temi was sitting in the corner of the room, grinding herbs, and he realized she had stayed all night to monitor him. Not because she cared, but because her healer's oath wouldn't let her abandon even the man who had abandoned her. The irony cut deeper than any blade, and Chief Adekun understood that surviving this illness might be easier than surviving the weight of his own guilt. 7 days stretched before him like 7 years, and he had no idea if his daughter would ever speak to him as anything other than a patient, or if he even deserved anything more than her clinical care and cold efficiency. Can a father's regret undo 23 years of abandonment? Will Temi find it in her heart to forgive the unforgivable? Mama Duke sat across from Chief Adekun on the 3rd day of his treatment, her eyes sharp despite her 70 years. The fever had broken, but he was still weak, barely able to walk to the small courtyard where morning sun filtered through palm trees. Temi was away gathering fresh herbs from the deeper forest, and the old woman had decided it was time to tell the man exactly what his cruelty had cost. "You want to know what I found that morning?" Mama Duke began, her voice steady but filled with an edge that made Chief Adekun shrink into himself. "I was checking my traps for bush rats, something my late husband and I did every morning to supplement what little we had. We were herbalists, but we were poor, living on the edge of the forest because we had nowhere else to go. And there wrapped in cloth that cost more than everything we owned, was a baby so small and weak I thought she was already dead. She paused, letting the words sink in like poison. But she wasn't dead. She was fighting. Even at just 1 day old, abandoned in the forest where animals roam, that child was fighting to live. Her skin condition made her look different. Yes, but it wasn't the death sentence you assumed it was. It was eczema, severe but treatable, combined with some respiratory weakness that needed care and time. Things money could have easily provided. But you didn't give her money or care. You gave her abandonment and a death sentence. Chief Adekunle's hands gripped the edge of his seat, his shame of physical weight crushing his chest. Mama Aduke continued relentlessly, determined that he understand every detail of his sin. My husband, Papa Aduke, was a gentleman who couldn't have children of his own. When we found Temi, he cried. He actually cried and thanked the ancestors for sending us a daughter in our old age. We took her home, and I used every herb I knew to strengthen her lungs, to soothe her skin, to help her survive. We had no money for hospitals, so I relied on knowledge passed down through generations. For the first year, I barely slept because I was so afraid she would die. She was so small, so fragile, but she didn't die. She thrived. By age 2, her skin had cleared significantly. By age 5, she was healthy and bright and curious about everything. The old woman's eyes glistened with tears now, but her voice remained strong. Papa Duke died when Temi was 7. His last words were about her. He told me to make sure she knew she was wanted, that she was loved, that she was a gift and not a burden. He never knew the full story of where she came from. I only told her the truth when she turned 16 and started asking questions about the expensive cloth she had been wrapped in the hospital band with a wealthy family name. Temi had taken the news with a maturity that broke Mama Duke's heart. The 16-year-old girl had cried for 2 days, not for herself but for the mother who had lost her, for the father who had been too proud to love her. Then she had dried her tears and made a decision. She would become the best healer in the region, would help people regardless of who they were or what they could pay. She would be what her biological father was not, someone who saw value in every life, especially the one society overlooked. For 7 years, Temi had trained intensively, learning not just from Mama Duke but from other herbalists across 3 states. She had a gift, people said, an intuition about which plants would heal which ailments. By 21, she had her own shrine, and people came from villages and eventually from cities to seek her help. She never turned anyone away. The homeless man with infected wounds received the same care as a politician's wife with mysterious pains. Temi had built her reputation on compassion, on seeing the humanity in every person who came to her. Until 3 days ago when the man who had denied her humanity walked into her shrine, dying and desperate. Mama Duke watched Chief Adekunle process this information, watched him realize that his daughter had become everything he pretended to be, successful, respected, genuinely powerful in ways that had nothing to do with money. His empire was built on ruthlessness and pride. Hers was built on love and service. She wanted to refuse you, Mama Duke said quietly. When Bayo first came here a week ago, before you got sick, asking if the forest healer could help his boss, Temi recognized the name. Bayo is the one who told us the full story, crying and begging for forgiveness, explaining that he had nightmares for 23 years about the baby he left in the forest. He comes here sometimes. Did you know? He brings money for the shrine, helps with repairs. He has been trying to make amends for his part in your sin. Chief Adekunle's eyes widened. His trusted driver, visiting his abandoned daughter, seeking forgiveness while Chief Adekunle himself had forgotten she existed. Temi wanted to refuse you, Mama Duke repeated. She said you made your choice and should live with the consequences. But I told her what Papa Duke always said. Healing is not about deserving. It's about choosing love even when everything in you wants to choose hate. So she agreed, but on one condition. The old woman leaned forward, her eyes boring into Chief Adekunle's soul. You will spend these 7 days learning exactly what you threw away. You will hear every story, every struggle, every moment of her life that you missed. And at the end, you will leave here knowing that your daughter didn't just survive your cruelty. She rose above it and became better than you ever were. Chief Adekunle spent the rest of that day listening to Mama Duke's stories. He heard about Temi's first words, her first steps, how she used to follow Papa Ajuke into the forest, learning plant names before she could write. He heard about the years of poverty, how they sometimes went to bed hungry so Temmie could eat, how Mama Ajuke had sewn all of Temmie's clothes from donated fabric because buying new was impossible. He heard about the village children who mocked Temmie's skin in her early years, how she came home crying but refused to stay inside, refused to be ashamed of who she was. He heard about the day a snake bit Mama Ajuke and 12-year-old Temmie had administered the correct herbs and saved her life, revealing her gift for healing. Each story was a knife to his heart, showing him the rich, full life his daughter had lived without him, but also showing him the struggle she had faced because of him. When Temmie returned at dusk, carrying bundles of fresh herbs, Chief Adikun couldn't meet her eyes. She set down her bundles and began preparing his evening medicine without a word, but he could see the question in the set of her shoulders. Had he learned anything? Did any of this matter? He wanted to tell her yes, wanted to scream that he saw now what he had thrown away, but the words stuck in his throat, because seeing it wasn't enough. Understanding wasn't enough. Nothing would ever be enough to undo what he had done, and they both knew it. As Temmie handed him the evening dose of medicine, their hands touched briefly, and Chief Adikun felt the full weight of 23 years of absence crash over him like a wave, threatening to pull him under and drown him in regret that came too late to matter. The truth is unfolding, and it's more painful than anyone imagined. Will Chief Adikun find a way to truly make amends, or is some damage too deep to repair? Make sure you're subscribed because the next chapter will reveal a twist that changes everything. On the 5th day, everything changed when Folake arrived at the shrine. Chief Adikun was strong enough now to walk around the compound, his body healing even as his spirit remained crushed under guilt. He was sitting under a mango tree, watching Temmie treat a young mother and her sick child with such gentle care that it made his chest ache. Then he heard a voice he hadn't heard in 15 years, a voice that once promised to love him forever before he destroyed that promise with his cruelty. "Colonel!" He turned, and there stood Folake, thinner than he remembered, her hair gray at the temples, her eyes red from recent crying. Amara, his second wife, stood beside her, and from the expressions on both women's faces, Chief Adikun knew his carefully constructed lies were about to completely unravel. Bayo stood behind them, his head bowed, and Chief Adikun understood that his driver had finally confessed everything. Not just to him, but to Folake, the woman who had mourned a daughter who never actually died, whose grief had destroyed her mentally and physically while her husband moved on to a new wife and new life, leaving her broken and institutionalized for years. Temmie had frozen mid-motion, her hands stilling over the herbs she was crushing. She was staring at Folake with an expression Chief Adikun couldn't read, a mixture of curiosity, pain, and something that might have been longing. Folake moved forward slowly, her legs shaking, her eyes locked on Temmie with an intensity that made everyone else disappear. She had spent 15 years in and out of psychiatric hospitals, her mind shattered by grief and guilt and the betrayal of a husband who told her their baby died when something in her mother's heart whispered it wasn't true. When Bayo had appeared at her sister's house 3 days ago, where she now lived quietly, and told her the truth, Folake had collapsed. Her daughter was alive. Her daughter had been alive all these years, growing up without her, while she grieved a death that never happened. The rage had come first, burning through her like wildfire, rage at Chief Adikun for his monstrous cruelty, at Bayo for his complicity, at herself for not fighting harder, for believing the lie, for letting depression win. Then the rage had transformed into desperate need. She had to see her daughter. She had to know if the baby she held for only 3 hours 23 years ago could ever forgive her for not protecting her from her own father. Amora had insisted on coming, partly to support Folake, partly because she was horrified by what her husband had done and needed to see the truth with her own eyes. The three of them had made the journey to the forest, Bayo driving with tears streaming down his face the entire way, returning to the scene of his greatest shame. Now they stood in the compound, and the air felt heavy with all the words that needed to be said but seemed impossible to voice. "Temmie," Folake whispered, testing the name on her tongue, her voice breaking on the second syllable. "I named you Temitope. It means mine is enough to give thanks for. I held you for 3 hours, and I knew you were enough. I knew you were perfect, but I couldn't protect you from him." She gestured at Chief Adikun without looking at him, her disgust evident. Temmie set down her mortar carefully, her hands trembling now, her professional composure cracking. Mama Ajuke had moved to stand beside her, protective, ready to intervene if this became too much. Temmie's voice, when she spoke, was barely above a whisper. "You're my mother, my real mother." It wasn't a question but a statement, as if saying it aloud made it real. Folake nodded, tears streaming down her face now, unchecked and desperate. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I couldn't stop him. I'm sorry I believed the lie. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to search for you, to trust my instinct that you were still alive somewhere. I lost 15 years to grief and mental institutions while you were here, growing up without me. I failed you." The words poured out of her like a confession, and Chief Adikun watched his first wife lay bare her soul to the daughter he had stolen from both of them. Amora stood silent, witnessing the devastation her husband had caused, her own face wet with tears. She had known Chief Adikun was ruthless in business, but this level of cruelty to his own child and wife had shaken her to her core. She was questioning everything about the man she had married 5 years ago, wondering what else he was capable of if he could abandon his sick baby in a forest. Temmie stood slowly, her body rigid with emotion she was barely containing. She looked at Folake, really looked at her, seeing the grief carve into every line of her face, the years of pain that had aged her prematurely. Then she looked at Chief Adikun, sitting under the mango tree, and for the first time since he arrived, Temmie let her anger show. "You told I died?" Her voice rose, sharp and cutting. "You made her mourn me? You put her through that while you knew I was out here somewhere?" Chief Adikun couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. He had known he was cruel, but hearing it laid out like this, seeing the damage reflected in two women's faces, made it unbearable. Temmie advanced on him, her healer's calm completely shattered. "You destroyed 2 lives with one decision. You threw away your daughter and broke your wife's mind. For what? Your reputation? Your image?" She was shouting now, and patients in the compound had stopped to watch, sensing the enormity of what was unfolding. "I built myself from nothing. I survived because 2 poor herbalists chose to love me when my own father couldn't. I became someone who heals, who helps, who sees value in every life because I know what it's like to be deemed worthless. And you? You're just a man who built an empire on cruelty and pride. Your money means nothing. Your power means nothing. You're empty." The words hit Chief Adikun like physical blows, and he realized that this was a moment of true reckoning. Not the quiet guilt of the past few days, but this public exposure of his sins, witnessed by his wives, his driver, and the daughter he had wronged. Mama Duke stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Temmie, breathe. This anger will consume you if you let it." But Temmie spun toward her adoptive mother, her eyes wild with pain. "How can I not be angry? He took everything. He took my mother, my father, my chance at a normal life. He threw me away like I was nothing." Folake moved then, crossing the distance between them in quick steps, and did something that shocked everyone. She wrapped her arms around Temmie, pulling her into an embrace that the younger woman initially resisted before collapsing into it, her body shaking with sobs she had held back for 5 days. Folake held her daughter for the first time in 23 years, stroking her braided hair, murmuring apologies and reassurances, and crying along with her. Chief Adikun watched the reunion he had prevented for over 2 decades, watched his first wife comfort the daughter they should have raised together, and felt something crack open inside his chest. It was the final breaking of his pride, the complete destruction of the man he had been. He stood up, his legs weak not from illness but from the weight of what he had done, and he walked toward them slowly. Amora moved to block him, her expression protective, but he shook his head. He deserved her distrust. He deserved all of it. He stood at a respectful distance and waited until Folake and Temmie pulled apart, until both women looked at him with expressions of pain and anger. Then Chief Adikun the Lade, one of Nigeria's most powerful businessmen, got down on his knees in the date and did something he had never done in his entire life. He bowed his head and asked for forgiveness. Can forgiveness truly be given after such devastating betrayal? What will Temmie decide now that she's met the mother who never stopped loving her? This story is reaching its climax, so hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments if you think Chief Adikun deserves a second chance. The 7th day dawned with unusual clarity, the forest air crisp and filled with bird song that seemed almost too beautiful for the gravity of what was about to unfold. Chief Adikun was fully healed now, his body strong again, but he hadn't left the shrine. He had spent the last 2 days in silence, watching from a distance as Folake and Temi built a tentative bridge across 23 years of absence. They talked for hours under the same mango tree, Folake sharing stories of Temi's first 3 hours of life, how she had held her and counted her fingers and toes, how she had whispered promises she couldn't keep. Temi shared stories of her childhood, of Mama Aduke and Papa Aduke, of learning to heal, of the life she had built from abandonment. They cried together, laughed together, and began the slow process of building something that resembled a mother-daughter relationship. Chief Adekan watched it all, knowing he wasn't part of it, knowing he had forfeited his right to be part of any reunion. Amora had left on the 6th day, telling him quietly that she needed time to think about their marriage, about whether she could remain married to a man capable of such cruelty. He had nodded, unable to argue, unable to defend himself. Bayo remained, helping around the shrine, still seeking his own redemption through service. On the morning of the 7th day, Mama Aduke called them all together in the shrine's main room. Chief Adekanal, Folake, Temi, and Bayo sat in a circle, the air thick with unspoken words and unresolved pain. The old woman had decided it was time to facilitate what she called the final healing, the one that couldn't come from herbs or medicine but only from truth and choice. She looked at each of them in turn, her gaze steady and wise. "We have 7 days," she began. 7 days to decide what comes next. Chief Adekan, you asked for forgiveness on your knees 2 days ago. But forgiveness is not something you demand or even deserve. It's something that must be freely given, and only Temi can decide if she has it in her heart to give it. She turned to Temi, who sat with her spine straight, her face composed but her eyes revealing the turmoil underneath. "And you, my daughter, must decide not based on what he deserves, but based on what you need. Will holding on to this anger serve you? Will revenge make you feel better? Or will letting go, not for him but for yourself, free you from the chains of his cruelty?" The questions hung in the air, and everyone waited for Temi to speak. She didn't immediately, taking her time, thinking through everything that had happened since the man she had only known as an idea became real and dying and desperate in her shrine. "I don't forgive you," Temi said finally, looking directly at Chief Adekan, and the words were like stones dropping into still water. "I don't forgive you because forgiveness suggests that what you did was something that can be forgiven, and I'm not sure it is. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice, a calculated decision to eliminate a problem. You threw away a human life, your own child's life, because she wasn't convenient for your image." Chief Adekan's head dropped, his shoulders shaking, but Temi continued, her voice steady. "But I also don't hate you. Hate would give you power over me, would make me define myself by what you did, and I refuse to do that. I am Temitopalade, daughter of Folake who loved me, daughter of Mama and Papa Aduke who saved me, daughter of this forest that taught me resilience. I am a healer, a woman of purpose and dignity. I am not defined by your abandonment. I am defined by my survival and my choice to help others." She paused, letting the words settle. "So I won't forgive you, but I will release you. I release you from my life, from my thoughts, from the space you've occupied in my heart as an absence. You are free to leave here healed in body, but your soul is your own responsibility. Whether you choose to become a better man or remain the same prideful, cruel person who abandoned his child is up to you. I'm done carrying the weight of your choices." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the sound of Folake crying softly. Chief Adekan looked up at his daughter, seeing the strength and grace she possessed, strength that came from surviving him, and he understood that this was mercy even if it didn't feel like forgiveness. She was giving him his life back and asking nothing in return except that he leave her in peace. Chief Adekan cleared his throat, his voice rough with emotion when he finally spoke. "I don't deserve your mercy, but I'm grateful for it. I spent 23 years building an empire I thought would make me immortal, make me remembered. But all I built was emptiness. My second marriage is falling apart. My business partners respect my money, but not me. I have no real friends, no legacy worth leaving. And now I know why. I destroyed the most important thing a man can have, his family, because I was too proud to love what didn't fit my image." He looked at Folake, seeing the damage he had caused written in every line of her face. "I destroyed you too. I watched you fall apart and did nothing because admitting why you were grieving would mean admitting what I'd done. I had you institutionalized, told people you had a breakdown, and moved on with my life. I'm not asking for forgiveness from you either, because I know I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I see now what I did. I see all of it, and it's destroying me from the inside. Folake met his eyes, and what he saw there wasn't hatred but a deep, weary sadness. I divorced you in my heart 15 years ago, Colonel, she said quietly, when you had me committed instead of helping me grieve. When you remarried and moved on as if our daughter never existed, I knew our marriage was truly dead. I only came here for Temi, not for you. You're nothing to me now except the father of my child, and even that is a biological fact, not a relationship. The words were final, a door closing that would never open again, and Chief Adikon accepted them because he had no choice. Bayo spoke next, his voice trembling as he addressed Temi directly for the first time. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I need to say this. I've lived with what I did for 23 years. Every night, I dream of that morning, of carrying you into the forest, of leaving you there and driving away. I told myself I was just following orders, that I had no choice, but that's a lie. I had a choice. I could have refused. I could have taken you to an orphanage, to a church, anywhere but where I left you. But I was a coward, afraid of losing my job, afraid of Chief Adikon's anger. So I chose my comfort over your life, and I've been trying to make amends ever since. He wiped his eyes, his face twisted with guilt. When I heard rumors of the forest healer years ago, I came to see if it was you. When I saw your birthmark, I knew. I've been bringing money, helping with repairs, trying to somehow balance the scales, but I know nothing I do will ever be enough. I just needed you to know that I see what I did, and I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry. Temi looked at Bayo, and her expression softened slightly. Unlike Chief Adikon, who had given the order, Bayo had at least tried to make amends in his own way. She nodded slowly. I see your remorse, Bayo, and I acknowledge your efforts to help. That doesn't erase what you did, but it shows you're trying to be better. That's more than some people do. Mama Aduke stood, signaling that the time for words was ending. Chief Adikon, you came here dying, and you leave here healed. That is the extent of what you're owed. Folake, you came here grieving a daughter you thought was dead, and you found her alive. Your relationship with Temi will grow in its own time, in its own way. Temi, you face a man who abandoned you and chose your own peace over his punishment. That is a mark of true strength. She looked at each of them in turn, her expression both stern and compassionate. Now it's time for Chief Adikon to leave. His 7 days are complete. Chief Adikon stood slowly, his body healed but his soul still wounded, knowing that wound might never fully close. He looked at Temi one more time, memorizing her face, the daughter he had thrown away who had become more remarkable than he could have imagined. Thank you for my life, he said simply. I'll spend whatever years I have left trying to become someone worthy of the mercy you showed me. Temi nodded but said nothing more, and Chief Adikon understood that this was goodbye, possibly forever. He turned to leave, but Mama Duke's voice stopped him. Before you go, Chief Adikon, there's something you should know. The illness that brought you here? It's spreading because wealthy people like you have been dumping chemical waste near the slums, poisoning the water supply. Temi figured that out days ago. She's been treating the symptoms, but the real cure requires you and your business partners to clean up your mess and stop poisoning poor communities. That's how you make amends. Not with words, but with action that saves lives you've endangered through your greed. Chief Adikon left the shrine that afternoon, driven by Bayo in the same vehicle that had brought him there dying a week ago. But he was a different man than the one who had arrived. The physical healing was complete, but the spiritual and emotional healing had only just begun. In the weeks that followed, Chief Adikon did something unexpected. He went to his business council and exposed the illegal dumping, facing legal consequences and public scandal to force the cleanup of contaminated water sources. His reputation was destroyed, his business empire crumbled, and Amara divorced him, but the mysterious illness stopped spreading. Lives were saved because one man finally chose to value life over image. He sold his mansion and most of his assets to pay for the environmental cleanup and the medical treatment of those already affected. He moved into a modest apartment and got a job as a business consultant, using his skills to help small companies instead of building empires. Every month, He sent money to Marmaduke's shrine, not for Temi but for the patients who couldn't afford treatment. He never asked to visit, never tried to force a relationship, respecting Temi's boundaries even as it broke his heart. Folake moved to a small house near the shrine, building a relationship with her daughter slowly, carefully, making up for lost time one conversation at a time. Temi welcomed her mother into her life, and they healed together, two women reclaiming what Chief Adekun's cruelty had tried to destroy. 5 years later, on a warm afternoon, Chief Adekun received a letter. It was from Temi, the first direct communication since he left the shrine. It was brief. "I've been watching what you've been doing. The environmental work, the changed life, the amends you're trying to make. It doesn't erase the past, but it shows you're trying to be better. Marmaduke is getting old and needs help managing the shrine. If you want to help, not as my father, but as someone making amends, you can come on Saturdays to maintain the grounds and help with supplies. No promises beyond that." Chief Adekun read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a door opened slightly, a chance to be near his daughter even if only as a helper at her shrine. He showed up that Saturday with work gloves and a humble heart, ready to serve the daughter he had once thrown away, grateful for any chance to be part of her world, even from the margins. And as he worked in the garden, pulling weeds alongside other volunteers, he realized that this humble service was worth more than all the empires he had built on pride. Because for the first time in his life, Chief Adekun Alade was doing something that truly mattered. He was choosing love over image, redemption over reputation, and his daughter's peace over his own comfort. It had taken him decades and the loss of everything to learn what Mama and Papa Duke had known from the beginning, that every life has value, that love is a choice, and that it's never too late to start becoming the person you should have been all along. And that's the end of this powerful story of redemption and consequences. If this story touched your heart, smash that like button, subscribe to our channel for more emotional stories, and share this with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to choose to be better. Drop a comment below telling us what you think about Chief Adekun's journey. Did he deserve a second chance? We'll see you in the next story.